There's a phrase I keep hearing from men lately. I feel like I'm a walking ATM. Now, when a man says that, it can indicate a number of things. It could be frustration, it could be resentment, it could be shame. But here's the thing, I'm not sure how many men are actually uncomfortable about the money part. I think for a lot of us men, it's something else. It might be the sense that we're replaceable, we're just a paycheck. For others, it might be that we realize we're actually so much more than what generations of indoctrination have taught us. But yet our masculinity is tightly bound to this thing, this provision, being the provider, being the protector. In American society, money has become the easiest metric to measure the value of a man. But what happens when the provider role becomes the dominant role for a man? What happens when the relationship feels defined by what you fund rather than who you are? Tonight, Taylor Ashton Elwood and I are going to try to unpack some of this tension. And we're going to think about things like, well, how do men recognize when a relationship is structured around a man's utility? Why do we so easily equate masculinity with money? And what emotional needs are really going unmet when a man says he feels like a walking ATM? Now, this is not about blaming women, and it is not about telling men to withdraw from things like provision. And it's not about pretending that provision doesn't matter. Bills arrive every day. That's a fact of life, and things have to get paid for. What we're talking about tonight, Taylor and I, are these deeper questions that form the base of this issue. How can men better manage the push and pull of provision, but still deposit more value in their self-worth bank account? So let's talk about it. Welcome, Taylor. How are you?
I'm good. Well, thank you for having me on your show. It's good to be on the opposite end, so to speak, and get a chance to talk about it. This is a really provocative topic.
And why do you call it provocative?
I call it provocative because I think that a lot of times the relationship with money goes unexamined, especially when it comes to relationships and why people are with each other. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with bringing money and finances in. I mean, it is something that people argue a lot about. And I think it's really important to have a clear understanding as to like what the role of money and finances is. But I think when it defines a relationship, it ends up creating a lot of maybe unintentional harm, maybe intentional harm. But it's something that particularly for men, we're framed by the money that we make. We're framed by that provision and that ability to provide. And it's not necessarily something that every man wants to be framed by. It's not something that is necessarily how we want to be valued. And yet it plays a significant role in the way that we're valued and measured.
Yeah. I mean, just a brief background on me. So, the woman that I married had always told me that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom until the kids were in school full time. And I had agreed to that. So I took that on my shoulders. And I have to say, being the person who is solely responsible for there being a roof over your heads, that the heat is being paid for, the air conditioning is being paid for, the climate control, that there's food on the table, that money's being put aside for vacations, for savings in case something goes wrong. When you realize all of that sits on your shoulders, it is an intense amount of pressure. And I've always felt one of the greatest benefits of feminism and women being in the workplace is the sharing of that responsibility, and not just the fact that women now have autonomy and agency and something outside the home that gives them worth. But geez, for any guy who can take that off his shoulders, and not be the only one responsible for it, huge load. So I agree with you. It was my identity for 2 decades. I was the walking ATM, and it almost broke me. So let's dive in. What's the most intriguing thing that's going on in your head about men and money?
The first question I have, and it's a pretty important one, before we even get into the whole relationship piece, is why do we associate masculinity with money?
Right.
So I think that that is a very prevalent theme that I see for a lot of men. Certainly, I've experienced that at times, and and at other times, I've been in relationships where the person I was with made more money than I did, and I was perfectly fine and comfortable with that. Like I didn't care about it one way or another who made how much, as long as we were working on things in a good way. But I think it's just an interesting experience to see how much money frames the context of masculinity.
As the world became industrialized, it still stayed that way. And now men weren't just on a farm working collaboratively with a woman, because maybe it wasn't money so much as just making sure that the house got built, the wood got chopped, the chicken eggs got collected in the morning, and the farming was done, and to some degree that was co-equal relationship, because the husband and the wife were at the same place. Once you started to industrialize and the husband had to leave the home, someone had to leave the home, and especially in an industrial age, manufacturing, women still weren't accepted in certain environments. That to me is where this whole masculinity was tied into income, because it was just the way the world decided to operate. And because women are uniquely capable of, giving birth and breastfeeding, I think, it was an unfortunate set of circumstances, both for females as males, that we started dividing this up. But interestingly enough, there's this fella who wrote, and I'm forgetting his name now, but he wrote a piece about feminism during the suffrage movement in the early 20th century, where he said the way we define masculinity and femininity, male and female roles, is hurtful to both, because what we do is we bifurcate a person. The husband is no longer a nurturer and caretaker at home. He goes off to work and he has half a life. And the woman has no life outside of the home. Her whole life is dedicated to, being a caretaker of some kind. And it was a very prescient piece that gets so little, publicity, that going back to the early 20th century, some people were questioning, to some degree, why is provision a masculine thing? Do you think it's changed much in your, I'm 61, I'm not sure what your age is. Do you think provision is less important and dominant in the male psyche today, or do you think it's still pervasive?
Yeah, I'm 49. And I think one thing that's important to note in the history of all that is that, up until like the 1970s, women weren't even allowed to have like a bank account in their name or anything like that. I think that's an important thing to acknowledge.
Yep.
I think it's still pretty prevalent that men are expected to be the providers. You look at even modern dating, usually the expectation is the man is going to pay for the dating or pay for the first date or something like that. Or there's an expectation sometimes of where around a man's ability to provide and whether that's attractive or not. Now, again, I do think that it's not always the case. Like I said, my second marriage, I was with somebody who made a lot more money than I did. And that was just, it was kind of one of those things where it was like, okay, that's fine. Like neither of us really looked at it one way or another. And I've been in other relationships where I made more money than the person I was with. But I think that what's really interesting is that sometimes it feels like there is a subtle layer of expectation that I will see sometimes in relationships where it's kind of like, okay, if you're the man, you're expected to take care of all the things. And again, it hasn't always been my experience. Sometimes I've been with somebody who's been perfectly willing to pay the bills and cover all that stuff. And I think it's wonderful and refreshing. So it can happen. But I think that a lot of what I see with a lot of men is that kind of expectation that is put on them and that pressure And some of it's self-pressure. I think that's really important to acknowledge and recognize, because that's one of the frames, the very rigid frames of masculinity. And some of it is pressure that is just society, or it might be pressure from their romantic partner.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get into, I don't work with men, so to speak. I think you do, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You work with men. So you get a lot of input from men. And I think we want to get a little bit later. I want to get into what you just said about, how do men then start to controvert this thing that society's placing upon them? So we'll get to that a little bit later. You raised a really good question in the prep work for this call, which is, what can men do to recognize how their relationship is defined and whether or not money is the defining thing for it? Have you seen any trends in speaking to men where you feel like you're aware of, they're heading down this path, but the men aren't?
So well, I'm going to share a personal experience, and then I'll kind of speak to that. I had a personal experience where I was with somebody where she very much expected me to simultaneously take care of her provisionally, but then also she also was kind of like, well, I want you to treat me as an equal, which I was more than happy to. Like there's that's not even a question, but like in terms of money, she wanted me to pay for everything. And that's where it felt like there was like this lack of alignment in place. And it really caused me to kind of question, like, well, what is this relationship then? What is the basis of this relationship? Am I just a walking wallet or a walking ATM for her, except for when it's, and then like when it's convenient for her, she'll say something otherwise, but when reality, the action lines up that way. And then what I see sometimes with the men that I coach is that, in some cases, there will be men who, and I work with a specific segment, submissive men. So there will be some men who are happy to be financially dominated, but then there are some who are like, I don't want to be financially dominated. I don't want to pay for an experience that I genuinely want to have with somebody. Like I want to know that they want to be with me, and that it's not just like something where I'm paying for that experience. And so I think it's a really important factor to kind of look at, like, well, like what is it that we genuinely want? And are we sometimes putting ourselves into situations where we're paying for something, or we're being put into a place where it's expected that, oh, you're going to pay money for this, or you're going to provide everything and take care of everything. And I might be working at a job myself, but you know what? I'm going to conveniently go toward the traditional role when it suits me versus the role that I otherwise want to occupy.
Yeah. It's one of the things I always worry about for men when it comes to things like money in a relationship is, and I've got men who debate me on this, but I lean heavily towards this theory, is that in general, men have less of a capability of truly identifying the feelings that they're having. They may know, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy. But what they don't understand is, I'm sad because, which is the real emotion that's going on inside them. I'm sad because I don't make enough money for my partner, and I'm ashamed that my job doesn't pay for that. And that's where my sadness actually comes from. Or I'm happy because my money is getting my sexual needs taken care of right now. That being able to get deeper underneath those things. And I always worry that because money is so apparent, my girlfriend wanted to go out to dinner tonight. I have the bank account and the credit card that can pay for it. I feel good showing up at the restaurant and escorting her to the table. I'm not concerned about what she ordered. She went for an extra glass of expensive wine, whatever. I'm walking out of that restaurant feeling like I did the manly thing. When there's a bunch of other emotions that might be going on inside him, like he loses his job. And now she's not getting those things. And now there's stress in the relationship. Does he have the emotional capability to start to realize, I was defining myself with her as this person. I have these other needs, and I may actually lose one of those needs, which is love and affection, or at least what I thought I was getting, love and affection from this person. That's what concerns me the most about this whole money thing, is that if men are not emotionally aware, how do they know that the money isn't just masking a whole bunch of other emotions? Have you seen that either in yourself or in other men?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can think of one example of, like, for myself, and certainly I can think of others where I was with somebody where she was making more money than I was, but she kind of expected that I would take her out to dinner and stuff like that. And at a certain point I started to feel this pressure, like, well, like, okay, like, I'm not always going to be able to afford to do this. I'm not making as much money as you are, and I've got bills to pay and things like that. We were living separately at the time, and she had fairly expensive tastes. So it felt like there was a lot of pressure there. I didn't really feel good about it at all, because I was kind of like, well, why am I doing this? And part of it was pressure that I was putting on myself. Well, I need to be the provider. I need to show up a certain way. This is part of what makes me attractive to her. Part of it was expectations on her part. I mean, we ended up having a long conversation about it. And she acknowledged that there was some expectations there, and that it was something that she found really appealing, and expected. And so it kind of highlighted for me, like, well, like, where, when do I as a man need to maybe speak up and say, this is making me feel really sad because, or upset because. And again, I agree with you that I don't know that men always know the full range of their emotions. I think that they might identify, like, I'm feeling angry, but why am I feeling angry? What's really going on? That usually takes a bit of additional work. And so I think, like, when I talk with clients about this too, it can be a case of where it's like, well, I'm feeling like my value is solely based on the amount of money that I make or what I can do for her, as opposed to who I am to her and what that means. And so there's kind of a difference between the beingness of the relationship and the doingness, and whether or not the doing has more value than the being.
Do you see a difference, Taylor, in men who react? I'm going to use the word negatively. Men who react negatively to feeling like a wallet, a walking ATM, and men who kind of have that strong sense of being that you just described, that they know who they are, they know what they are, and therefore they don't tend to have these feelings of, oh wow, she's mistreating me because all she wants from me is my money, or she overly associates me with provision. Is there, something there for men who can develop a sense of self-worth that can battle this dominance of provision?
I think there is. I think a huge part of it involves getting into what money means to the man, and exploring that relationship and understanding, like, very clearly, like, well, what meaning does money have for me, and how do I relate to that money? And what does it say about me if I choose, for example, to recognize that, like, I don't necessarily have enough money to go out for dinner this month, but I have enough money to buy groceries and cook and take care of things that way. What does it say about me if I choose to be very careful with the way that I steward my money and use it, as opposed to, I'm just going to spend it left and right because I happen to have it?
Right.
A huge part of, I think, becoming a grounded man really comes right down to exploring those kinds of relationships. So, like, a man who's kind of feeling maybe angry and resentful because he's feeling like he's being treated like a walking wallet, there may be some nice guy behaviors that he needs to address there, where he's basically not speaking up for the fact that, like, there's some problems here. And this isn't something I can necessarily afford right now. And if that's what's defining our relationship, then maybe this really isn't the right relationship for me.
Right.
Whereas a man who is confident in himself could say, like, this isn't working for me. We need to really look at this. And if you are defining me in terms of my worth on basis of money, then I can walk away because it's not worth it for me to be in a relationship, but that's the only reason you're with me.
I've read 2 books recently. One was Scott Galloway's Notes on Being a Man, and the other was Belle Burden's memoir about her marriage and divorce, Strangers. And in both books, the predominant protagonist was someone whose childhood was marked by financial instability. And as a result, they were heavily invested in the provider role. That was their identity. And in Scott Galloway's case, Notes of Being a Man, he comes right out and says it. He sees the correlation between the way he grew up and how he's never got enough money, always got to be working. You don't get to find out about Belle Burden's husband because he didn't participate in her memoir. But when you hear about his childhood, you say to yourself, yeah, that was someone who lived with a lot of stress. And I would naturally believe that they don't ever want to be poor again. And if they choose to be a parent and a partner, they're going to bring that to that relationship. I've seen it in women as well. I just wonder if, this trauma that a man could go through as a child would just become such and added to the societal indoctrination about what a man's role is, it can just be overwhelming to a man. And in Belle Burden's husband's case, you just don't get the sense that the man was truly emotionally connected to people. You sense that he was a good person relatively, that he was active with friends, but you don't get the sense that there was truly an emotional connection that built a broader personality that could handle things like, oh, I'm getting divorced, I have to give up 50% of my wealth. Well, no big deal. It's not an indication of who I am, and it's just fair. You didn't get that sense. And I really do believe that while women and men can go through a lot of the same trauma as children, that extra indoctrination from society puts men at greater jeopardy. And that always, sits and weighs in the back of my mind. I know that even though my family was never poor, we were blue collar, there were stressful times. My father was a carpenter in my early years. And when he didn't have work, you knew, because mom cooked differently. She cooked cheaper foods. I always tell my kids, you knew dad wasn't doing too well when mom was making pasta fagioli because it was a dirt cheap thing that stuck to your ribs, made you feel full. She could get away with that easier than, trying to pay for steak or something or ground beef. And I know that I'm a bit of a provider. I do get a lot of my satisfaction in life from that identity. If you had thrown more trauma at me, I probably would have been a type A lunatic.
Well, I mean, I definitely grew up with, it was kind of interesting. I grew up in 2 different households. So like I grew up in a household where my dad was the provider and made a decent amount of money. And, we never really, I don't know that we ever really worried about like the quality of food. He was doing pretty good. And then I went and lived with my mom, and she was definitely scraping by. And so it was definitely watch your money, be really careful, watch every penny. And that was kind of sort of holding those 2 different experiences was very real for me. And I started working when I was 14, which, I think was normal for somebody my age or older. But it seems kind of like nowadays it's for a lot of younger people that they don't necessarily work that soon or have that experience.
Yeah.
And, I think it's an interesting thing because the way that even I approach money now is like, I tend to be pretty careful with it because I know that like there's always those things to plan for that you can't anticipate in the moment. that nonetheless call for like, hey, you might need this right now. So here you go. Pull that out and keep an extra bit of it on hand.
I'll tell you, when I'm driving my car, I am always feeling what the brakes feel like. Are they starting to feel soft? Because I know how much that's going to cost when the brakes come due.
Yeah.
So yeah, do I have enough in the bank account? Because if your brakes don't work, you can't drive your darn car.
There you go.
So how do you help men tell the difference between being valued for provision versus being valued as a person? Do you have like key things that you tell them to think about, to look out for, to listen for from, conversations, obviously behaviors? How do you sort of build that awareness for a man?
The first thing that I really look at doing when I work with men is helping them get clear on whether or not they want to be a provider. They might want to be, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what they want, but they should go into it with eyes open and be really consciously clear about it. Then what I do is I kind of get them to look at their relationship with money and like their history with it, because I think it's a really important thing to understand as well. Like what is my history with money? What was it like growing up? How has it changed? How has it not changed? I think those are very important things to look at when it comes to the relationships that men have with money. And then it's kind of looking at the relationship in general and saying, well, with this person that's with me, what's the reason they're with me? What are the things that kind of stand out to me? Like, is there this unconscious power dynamic in place where she expects me to always pay for the date, where she expects me to always cover the expenses? Or has there been discussion? What does that look like? And what does it even look like in terms of if we have a household together, how do we manage money together? Who's making the decisions? And are those decisions being made in a way that really supports everyone involved? I think a lot of times the conversations that we don't have define the relationship that we're in. So conversations around money are a good one, because a lot of times people aren't speaking to what's going on with money, and money is the survival ticket.
I think if there's, one piece of financial advice I would ever offer to someone as they're thinking of, accepting an invitation to get married or to invite a partner to get married is, have you had a truly meaningful discussion about your philosophy on money? If you are a spendthrift and the other person isn't, how do you know that? What examples do you have from their life experiences that show you how they feel, not just the words that they say, because people can say things that aren't necessarily true. And could you get along with someone like that? I have seen opposites who figure these things out when it comes to money, and I'm not sure how they do it because I don't get that deeply involved in their lives. I just know that, my personal philosophy was very different from my now ex-wife's personal philosophy when it came to money. And as a result, it caused tons of hardship almost from the beginning of our marriage. And I don't think we had that discussion at the very beginning. I kind of thought we were on the same page, but, I don't think we ever got into that true heart-to-heart, genuine conversation where we could both evaluate each other in a clear-eyed manner.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really powerful thing right there, because a lot of times those conversations that don't happen are also speaking to the values that each person has. I think one of the mistakes that I see people make in general is they'll date on the basis of like how hot somebody is or how attractive they seem to be. But if I had any advice for anybody, man or woman or otherwise identified, it would be date on the basis of values. Do you have shared values? Does this person care about the same things that you care about? It doesn't mean you have to agree on everything, but it does mean that you have to have a pretty fundamental understanding of where each of you is coming from, and you're able to decide whether or not you can make that work.
Yep. So now, we've talked about how society tells men leading with money is important. It is a sign of your masculinity. What do you think men are afraid of today if they stop leading with money? Is it rejection by women? Is it that they will be, and then it doesn't matter whether or not, they're already in a relationship or trying to woo somebody. Is it that they become invisible in society because society so highly values signals of money? I mean, I cannot tell you how many times on Instagram Reels I see, because I search a lot for the word masculinity. I talk about men a lot. So I get a lot of influencers from across the board. And I see these guys who are, stepping out of a Lamborghini, or, these mock prank videos where a guy pulls up with a Lamborghini and the woman's, attracted to him instantly. Is he invisible because he doesn't do that? What do you think is the reason why men cling to leading with money so much?
I think one of the reasons why is because money is kind of the most significant example of status that we have. I mean, at one time it might have been otherwise. It might have been like, oh, he's the strongest warrior, or he's the best hunter, or something like that. But it's really a sign of wealth. Mm-hmm. And so, and wealth kind of signals like this person has the ability to provide. This person has the ability to take care of family, of kids, and all these other things. So it's kind of like, okay, this person has that ability. So I think that one of the reasons why men can be really reluctant to stop, or can kind of cling to money, and to be really reluctant to let that go, is because then it's like, well, what's the perception of me as a man? Yeah. Am I man enough? Do I have enough value as a man if I'm not the one making a ton of money? And I mean, I'll say, like, this is something that I'm aware of sometimes of myself. Like, there are times where I'm really aware of, like, well, I'm not necessarily able to help out financially with something. Does that make me less of a man? Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, it's like, well, no, it doesn't, but I can see how society would think that.
I think the status part of it is really what I see. When I think back to the fact that in my neighborhood where I grew up, there was a pilot 2 doors down. There was he was a physician of some kind. I don't remember. There were a couple of people who commuted the very long trip into New York City. And here's my dad, a carpenter, a blue collar guy running his own carpentry business, coming home sweaty and smelly and needing a shower, versus these other guys getting off of trains, or, coming home in their pressed uniforms. I think because my dad could afford a house in their neighborhood, the status was still the same. They were on an even plane, even though one flew a plane and another one was a corporate executive. I think the status was still there for my dad because he was providing at the same level as everybody else. And I feel like, especially with income inequality and social media's ability to push, a view of what money can provide to a woman, to a family. Here we are off in Hawaii. Here we are at Disney World for the 3rd time this year. I think a lot of men can feel like the income they're producing has tremendously lowered their status. And even if they've already won the woman's heart, there's a hole in his heart because he's not competing with, the people who are, regaled in on social media and on television. I really, for me, it's definitely a status thing. It may not be the exact sum of income, but it's the ability to say, look how much I can do. Look where we're traveling to. And that can start to create that, I guess I'm not as much a man, thought in a guy's head.
I definitely think that can be the case. I mean, there's kind of that reality of like, oh, we can go do this, or we can go out and have this meal, or we can have these different experiences, and that makes me more of a man, or whatever, or not. And that's where I think a lot of times this it's so important for men to also kind of look at other ways that they can value themselves that isn't based on just the external marker of how much money they make. Because the reality is that a man could be doing some very important work and not necessarily be making a ton of money, but nonetheless still bring a deep sense of value to and meaning to the world. And when we don't recognize that, I think it leads to a lot of the other societal problems that we see, where it's kind of like the emphasis is more on how much money can be made, and as opposed to how can we be of service to other people.
Yeah. And I just wonder, I haven't really researched this yet, but I wonder whether or not men who get paid a lot less but are in roles that deliver that kind of value to society, whether or not they don't struggle with the status of money and the ability to signal resources through social media posts, or talk around the water cooler around where you took the kids this summer for vacation. Do you find that men are capable of building a self-worth that is sort of a shield against this status signaling?
I think when men have a clear sense of purpose and mission in their lives, that's when that comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
When a man could say, like, this, what I'm doing has meaning to me, regardless of how much money I'm making, and it's a way that I'm contributing to the world or to something that's important to me, whatever that is. And that it's not about him centering himself around his romantic relationship, for example. It's learning to decenter the romantic relationship. It's learning to decenter money as the status. It's learning to really kind of center around, like to really focus in on like what brings something, what am I doing to bring something meaningful into the world, regardless of what it does or doesn't get me materially. And I mean, right. It's great when we make money because we're doing something that we genuinely love. It's a wonderful feeling, and that's not always going to happen. And that's not an indicator of that person's value. But when it's treated as an indicator of a person's value, it can actually take them away from their purpose and mission. So I think it's really important for men to learn how to decenter the external validation and really focus in on like what brings me a deep sense of meaning and purpose and allows me to serve myself and the world and others around me.
Yeah. I see that, Taylor, in the way that female teachers both gain self-worth from being a school teacher, but also the way the society so strongly holds them up in status because they're spending thousands of dollars a year in their own salary to provide, the things in this classroom that the kids can't get because, the taxes aren't paying for it. Teachers are regaled as sacrificial and, of course, protective of these young minds. And yet, what we know from studies is that men are less comfortable being in those roles because the income is so low. There are other reasons why, when you're such a small percentage of the total working population, you're going to face both implicit and explicit biases that don't make you feel as welcome in that environment. There's the whole concept of men feeling like they're going to be judged if they're a nurturing person. That's why they chose to be a school teacher. God forbid they hug a child. Are they now a pedophile? So there are many other things, but one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is the status that men don't seem to adopt the way women adopt from being a school teacher. And to me, I love what you just said, because if what a man started from was, I think it's so worthy that children have someone at an early age who shows them unconditional care and concern, who wants to see them flourish, who gets excited when they do something well and can convey that in an expressive manner. I want to be that person because it means so much to me. Then you can overcome a lot of the other traditional male, indoctrination because you've already got that sense of self-worth. I love kids. I love seeing kids flourish. If I can do that, I have self-worth. I guess men don't go through that process as much as females do. And very frankly, I don't believe that's biological. I think that's societal. I think society just downplays men as caregivers and nurturers. So now, why am I going to go do that job versus, construction or work in an office or whatever? We don't give men the ability to figure out some of these things that might be inside them deeply. I'd always wanted to be a school teacher. I went to school for journalism. I wanted to be the next Bob Woodward and break the next, investigative Pulitzer series. But I also had this deep desire to teach. And over time, I did teach in various forms in my life. And it was one of my greatest joys, was being an educator. When I was an educator of kids, it was off the charts joyful. There were also problems. Kids can be kids and they can be a pain in the neck when their hormones are going crazy at 13, 14 years old and they don't want to pay attention. But you just get through to one kid and you see a kid like have this light bulb go off. Holy crap. My self-worth was through the ceiling doing that. And I just don't think we give men the tools to go find those things early enough in life or even later in life to say, this is what I really wanted to do.
Well, and fortunately, that's where I think men's work can be really powerful in that way because it gives men a chance to discover some of those things. I know that, I've worked with a couple different organizations, and one of them, the Mankind Project, it's kind of like one of the things that's explored is like, what's your mission, for the world? Like, what is it that you're doing to show up in the world around you? So I think it's definitely possible to find that. And it also calls on a level of awareness on the part of the man to make that choice. And that happens when a man is connected to a community of other men who are doing that work. Going it alone and trying to figure it out on our own doesn't really work so well. It hasn't. And I don't think it ever really will.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot, what you just said. To me, achieving something with a group is so much more personally impactful than feeling like, wow, I won the day and I was the driving force behind X, Y, and Z. Strongly urge men who are watching this to let down those boundaries that make you want to be the person who is the success story and be a part of a success story of others who are talented and willing to collaborate with you and have a generosity of spirit to see a team succeed. It is a much more important way to feel fulfilled. To wrap this up, how do you try to help men develop that self-worth? When you do men's work, are there a couple of key things that allow a man to deeply penetrate his desires, his needs, understanding his skills and what he naturally is attracted to, so that he can build a foundation of self-worth that insulates him from having to strictly be, a provider?
One of the things that I end up doing with men is helping them to recognize that their masculinity isn't defined by the job they do or how much money they make or how stoic they are. Their masculinity is an expression of their identity, and they get to choose what that identity is. And part of choosing that identity is taking the time to explore what meaningful work looks like and saying, this is something that's meaningful to me, and choosing to claim that instead of continuing to do something that doesn't bring them a lot of meaning. I think one of the hardest experiences that I think a lot of people go through, not just men, but I definitely think, a lot of men definitely go through it as well, but is working at jobs that don't bring a deep sense of meaning or purpose. If we're going to spend 8 hours a day, which is basically 1/3 of the day, working for someone else, plus plus a lunch hour, plus time commuting to and from, if you have to commute, to this place, that's a lot of time that you're giving to somebody else.
It could be over half of your waking hours.
It could be over half your waking hours. So there's something really important about getting clear on like what brings you a deep sense of mission and purpose and drives that for you. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have hard times, or that you're not going to have moments where you genuinely don't like the job, or where you feel frustrated, or whatever else. It's the same thing whether you own a business or you have a job. There are going to be things that you like, and there are going to be things that you don't care for. But I think getting really clear on like, why am I doing this? How is this feeding and nourishing my soul and my purpose is a really important question that's worth asking. And it's worth it enough that yes, it can surely change your life. You may end up making some life-changing decisions about what you do and who you associate with and things like that. And that's worth it when you're clear on what brings you that deep sense of purpose and value into your life.
Do you find that is something that takes weeks, months, years for a man to discern, or are there like shortcuts that help a man get there faster?
I think a man on his own probably could spend the entire lifetime and never figure it out.
Yeah.
I think the shortcuts really come down to connecting with other people in a meaningful way, and connecting outside of just the framework of, for example, romantic relationship. Like a romantic relationship is great, and that provides one framework. But, some of the best relationships I have in my life right now are with other men. And being able to connect and talk with them. I was talking with a man earlier today, and we were we're kind of doing a coaching exchange. So I was coaching him and being able to support him in his work and like where he was at, and helping him work through a tough moment. That was something he really needed. It was my honor and privilege to do that for him. And that's kind of the thing of like, that's the shortcut right there. It's that we figure this out together. Instead of trying to figure it out on your own and white knuckle your way through life, or putting all your emotional eggs into one basket, i.e. your romantic relationship, it's really connected to the communities around you, to the people around you, and being able to share with them kind of what the struggles are, but also the joys and triumphs. And you'll get something out of that will lead you toward your North Star.
I'm part of a couple of men's groups on Facebook. They're private groups. And I think, to me, the best threads that I've read are where men are truly collaborating with each other, because someone has started a thread. The original poster has started something, truly has a genuine need. And it's amazing to see how many men authentically show up to say, hey, I get you. I hear you. I'm validating that what you're saying and thinking, feeling is accurate. Here's some thoughts for you to consider. And then maybe somebody jumps on that person's comment and builds on it. There are so many men out there who I think have grown so much and are willing to be a part of those types of communities that you just described. We need to normalize that. More of us men need to be talking about these communities, establishing these communities, so that people know, that there's some place for them to go. I don't think men do it as easily and readily as women do it. I think women just are naturally, more collaborative and are willing to be vulnerable. Men still kind of hold things in too much, and certainly don't want to share that we're struggling at work or with our relationships. But I think we're getting there. And I so see that as a productive step for men in today's society is, get a group of guys together and tell them these are the ground rules for this discussion group. and just, focus on the men who are truly there to collaborate, and others will fall away, but you will find men are generous when they start connecting with each other. And that, like you said, will help you find your North Star. When you've got a bunch of other guys being that sounding board, that is so important. Any last words? First of all, Taylor, where can we find you on Substack? Where can we find you outside of Substack? Give us the URLs and other ways to work with you.
You can find me at sovereignsubmission.com and sovereignsubmission.substack.com. And you can connect with me for a clarity call if you're curious about what I do and how I can help you with your work. And I mean, the other thing I would say is, I have a couple books out there. I have a book called The Quest for Mature Masculinity. I have a book on help it called Unbroken Man, which I'm in the process of doing like the final layout for, which is a book on helping men recover from divorces and breakups. So all of that is out there as well. You can find it on Amazon or other sites, and feel free to reach out and connect with me.
I strongly advise people to do so. Taylor has been a wonderful contributor on other people's podcasts. When you follow him on Substack and see his contributions on other people's threads, on their notes, he's always genuinely giving from a place of trying to help you explore, exactly what's going on inside you, whether it's positive, negative, or otherwise. So take him up on his offer. And certainly support him if you can subscribe to his Substack, purchase his books. The more we men support each other financially, the more men like Taylor can do good for other men. So, this is a rallying point for men. Support men who are trying to support you. We've got to do a lot more of that if we're going to figure out this whole masculinity conundrum. Taylor, as always, thank you for your time. It is the most precious gift any human being can give, and you gave me quite a bit here today and anybody who's watching. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time out today.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk again soon.
All right, sounds good.